The wind came low that evening, a ribbon of hush that wound its way through the yellow grass and over the bones of forgotten fences. It was the kind of silence that made animals freeze mid-step and the sky hold its breath. Wenia felt it first. In her joints, the ache that came before storms, before reckonings. She sat atop her paint mare, the sun brushing copper on her cheekbones, and stared into the dying light. Something was wrong with the land, she could feel it. Something had been left to rot. She nudged her mare forward without a word, heading down the slope toward a thicket of scrub where buzzards circled low. Vultures were always honest, more honest than men. They didn't pretend. They only came for what was already lost. Her moccasins barely whispered as she stepped down from the saddle, eyes scanning. The smell hit her first raw sweat, blood, the metal bite of fear. Then she saw it, a boy, maybe 18, tied to a broken stretch of fence with rusted wire cutting into his wrists. His chest was bare and burned red, his head slumped low like a marionette no longer summoned to dance. His lips were cracked and his breathing shallow, but still there, alive, just barely. She said nothing. He didn't move, didn't even look. At her, his eyes were swollen near shut, one brow split down to the bone. Flies had gathered at the corners of his mouth like mourners at a funeral. Wenia moved like a ghost, slow and sure. She drew her knife from her belt, its blade obsidian, black, older than any town. With steady hands, she cut the wires binding him, not quick, not sharp, but with reverence. As if peeling away shame rather than steel, the boy crumpled into the dust. She offered water from her canteen. He turned his face away, pride twitching. Under his bruises, she didn't insist. Instead, she poured a little into her palm and let the drops fall onto his cracked lips like rain on dry roots. When he finally took the canteen, he didn't drink like a man. He drank like an animal who thought this might be the last kindness he'd ever know. She watched the ridge. No footprints, no horses. Whoever left him meant for him to die alone and silent. Wenia didn't ask his name. She didn't offer hers. Names had weight, and weight could kill a wounded thing too early. She lifted him onto her mare, his body folding like cloth, and walked beside them through the dusk, the hoofbeat slow as a heartbeat dulled by grief. Her home lay hidden in the canyon, a place carved by time and fire, where the rocks held stories and the wind carried only truth. No one came there unless they meant to. Even the townfolks avoided it. They whispered about her, called her ghost, which, the woman who spoke to owls and rode without a saddle. They said she'd once had a baby who drowned in a flash flood. Others said she'd been cursed by her own people for marrying a white man. All stories, none of them whole. Wenia let the lies live their own lives. The truth was quieter, buried in her chest like coals that hadn't yet gone cold. She laid the boy on a pile of buffalo robes in the corner of her one-room cabin. He moaned but didn't wake. His ribs were too sharp, his fingers calloused like. He'd worked hard for nothing. She boiled herbs in a tin pot, the smell of juniper and rabbit tobacco rising like smoke prayers. She cleaned his cuts, washed the blood from his arms, bandaged the worst of the wounds with deer sinew and soft moss. When he awoke the next morning, the first thing he did was flinch. She had left him bread and honey on a flat rock beside his bedding. He stared at it as if it might turn to ash. Then, slowly, with fingers that trembled, he broke off a piece and ate, not greedily, like he didn't know if he deserved it. She sat outside, carving a new handle for her old blade, listening to the canyon. Time passed, as it does in such places, measured not by clocks, but by sun and wind. The boy did not speak for 2 days. When he did, his voice rasped low. "Why?" he asked. "Why me?" Ye didn't look up from her carving. "Why, what? Why help?" "Me?" She didn't answer. Some questions weren't owed answers, only silence. But later, when the stars rose like lanterns and the coyotes howled to their ancestors, she said, "You were left to die. That's enough reason." He didn't reply. But she saw something shift in him, a loosening, like the first drop of sap in winter. Over the next days, he began to move more. He cleaned her pots without being asked, watched how she crushed seeds between stone, how she used smoke to chase away fever. He didn't smile, but he didn't hide from her eyes anymore. One evening, Wanya caught him staring at the mirror shard, nailed to the wall above the wash basin. He touched his face gently, as if unsure it still belonged to him. His fingers hovered near a jagged scar on his cheek. "They said I stole horses," he murmured. "Didn't, just hungry." She nodded. Once. She'd seen that kind of justice before, delivered fast and without mercy to boys who had no fathers to defend them and no names anyone cared to remember. That night, she set down a red stone beside his bedding. It was smooth, the shape of a heart, something her child had once found and carried for days. The boy picked it up and didn't ask why. He held it as he slept. The town's presence returned like smoke. She felt it before she saw it. The boy's eyes kept flicking toward the canyon mouth, and birds flew in erratic circles. On the 5th day, 3 men rode up on dust-covered horses, rifles strapped to their backs and suspicion in their mouths. Wanya met them at the threshold, a silent wall of bone and will. "We're looking for a boy," said the tallest. "Dark hair, runty. Escaped from Calhoun's place." She said nothing. One of the men tried to push past her, but she stepped forward so slowly, so certainly, that even his boots hesitated. "You know you're harboring a criminal," the second man said, spitting near her feet. She pointed to the ridge with the tip of her chin. "No one tied him to that fence but your kind." The men exchanged glances. "You got no say in this," one muttered. "You ain't even." She stepped down 2 steps and looked directly into his face. "I am the land's daughter. I say who dies here." They didn't understand, but they felt something old, something they couldn't name. They left soon after, riding hard, the dust of their shame chasing them back to town. When she returned inside, the boy was sitting up, knees to chest. "I should go." Wanya poured water into the clay basin, handed it to him. "You are not healed. I'll bring trouble. You are not trouble." He looked at her long, as if trying to place her in the world that had never shown him mercy. "They never gave me a name." She studied him a moment, the shadows under his eyes, the scar like a comma on his brow. "You're still becoming. Names come when the time is right." Outside, the cicadas had begun their slow morning song. He took a breath, then another. His shoulders lowered just a little. That night, he sat beside her at the fire knot, across the room, not in the shadows. And when she handed him a bowl of stew, his fingers brushed hers and didn't pull away. Above them, the stars opened wide like eyes, watching something fragile begin to live again. And deep in the canyon's throat, the wind finally changed direction. The days fell into rhythm, though neither Wanya nor the boy, who still had no name, called it peace. It was a silence held together by breath and shared tasks. By the way, the morning light moved across the canyon walls, and the fire crackled, low in the evenings. He began to mend what he had once broken: tools, nets, the brittle corners of himself. She let him, never pressing, never asking what he dreamed of when he flinched in his sleep. He learned quickly. She taught without words, and he answered with action. She showed him how to mark the sun's shadow to track time, how to speak to birds without frightening them, how to press red clay against a fevered brow and listen to the trees before storms. His hands, once full of bruises and splinters, became steady. He carved a fishing spear with surprising grace. He began to hum sometimes when alone, low and tuneless like wind between rocks. But the world beyond their canyon had not forgotten him. It began with hoofprints, not theirs, and a torn scrap of red fabric caught in a mesquite branch near the waterline. He saw it first, eyes sharpening like a coyote's. When he brought it back to the cabin, Wanya held it for a long moment, her thumb tracing the hem. "They're looking," he said, voice like dry gravel. She said nothing, but that night she didn't sleep. She sat by the fire, a knife in her lap and her gaze fixed toward the canyon mouth, where darkness pooled like a promise that next day. He followed her into the canyon where the stone narrowed to a sacred passage. She showed him carvings in the wall, symbols left by those who had walked this land long before settlers brought their wire and wrath. There was a story there, scratched into time. A woman who lost her child, a fire that devoured, a deer that returned with new breath. "Is that you?" he asked, eyes tracing the spirals and figures. She looked at him, surprised. "No, it's what the land remembers, more than I do." He knelt near a sun-warmed rock and picked up a piece of blue shale. "I remember the first time someone hit me," he said. "I was 5. It wasn't a hand, it was a boot." Wanya didn't flinch. "They said I was born in a tent behind a saloon. My mother bled out, never saw her. They kept me for chores, beat me when I dropped a plate. I ran at 10, never stopped long." She crouched beside him, placed her hand lightly on his shoulder. "You stopped here." He looked up. "Only 'cause I was too broken to keep going." "No," she said gently, "because something here wanted you alive." Later that week, the riders came again. 2 men this time, their horses foaming at the flanks, their guns not holstered but loose in hand. Wanya saw them first, standing on the ridge, their outlines jagged against the sky. She didn't call out to the boy. Instead, she stepped out into the clearing and waited. "You've got our property," one called. "We ain't leaving without him." "Is he a man or an object to you?" Wanya asked, her voice low, steady. "He's a thief, half-breed, no name, no land, that makes him nothing." Wanya's eyes narrowed. "No one is nothing, not even you." They dismounted. The younger one moved fast, shotgun lifted. The boy stepped out from behind the cabin, not hiding, not running. His fists were clenched. He was shaking, but he stood straight. "I didn't steal your horses," he said. "I fed them when no one else did. I ran because I was tired of being hit. You stole." The man snapped. "That's all there is to it." "Even if I had," the boy said, louder now, "does that mean you get to tie me to a fence and let me die like a dog?" The silence after that was so heavy it bent. The branches, Wanya stepped between them. "He has a name now," she said. "He has a place." The man laughed. "What name? You gonna make one up for him?" "Yes," she said calmly. "I called him Tekoa. It means one who survives fire, and he earned it." The man spat. "You Comanche think your words change. What a man is." "They do," she replied. "When no one else will speak them, they do." The younger man raised his weapon a fraction more. One ear stood motionless, unblinking. Behind her, the boy Tekoa stepped forward, his hands out, empty. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," he said. And he wasn't. The men saw it. There was something in his stance now, something in his eyes that had weight. Not anger, not bravado, just presence. "Next time," the older man warned, backing toward his horse, "we come with lawmen." "You brought the law last time," Wanya said, "and you left him to die." They didn't reply. They rode off, dust swallowing them whole. That night, the air was thick with smoke. Somewhere west, lightning had set the plains on fire. The wind shifted hard and fast, bringing with it the scent of burning sagebrush and old fear. Wanya moved, with urgency, packing herbs and tying up bundles. The fire wasn't close, but wild things didn't stay far for long. "I can help," Tekoa said. She shook her head. "Stay in the canyon. If the fire jumps, take the northern path. But you, I've lived through flame before." He grabbed her wrist. "And I haven't. Let me learn." She looked at him a long time, then nodded. They moved together. Through the night-gathering water, burying fire lines in the earth, soaking hides to hang at the cabin entrance. Embers glowed along the distant ridge like watchful eyes, just before dawn. The wind shifted again, harder, this time unpredictable. A spark rolled down into the dry grass below the western slope. It lit like hunger. Wanya ran. She didn't think. She raced into the fire line where one of her drying racks was beginning to burn, trying to save the last of her winter herbs. A branch cracked above her. She slipped, then he was there. Tekoa charged into the smoke without hesitation, pulling her from the edge of the blaze, arms shielding her body with his. They tumbled to the ground, coughing, both smudged in ash and streaks of emberlight. "You fool," she wheezed. "I learned from the best," he rasped, holding her close, even as the flames retreated. When the fire passed, the world fell into eerie stillness. The canyon, blackened and smoking, bore scars, but they were still alive. She touched his cheek gently. "You didn't run," he shook his head. "I've run all my life. I finally found something worth staying for." Her eyes shone, but no tears fell. Instead, she reached for the red stone he still kept near his sleeping roll and pressed it into his palm. "This land," she whispered, "knows your footsteps now. It remembers." In the days that followed, the townspeople heard of the fire, of how it nearly took the Kenyan woman and her ward. They didn't come to help, but they didn't return to take either. Wanya and Tekoa rebuilt the garden bed, rehung the wind chimes, planted seeds in the scorched soil. He carved a totem out of driftwood, 2 figures, back to back, holding up the same sky. Sometimes at night, they sat by the fire, and he would tell her stories not of pain, but of things he imagined. Wild horses with wings, trees that sang, rivers that ran backward. She would smile and listen like they were prophecy. And once, as they sat in silence, he said, "You gave me more than a name." "You gave yourself the rest," she replied. Outside, the canyon exhaled. The wind moved soft through the rocks. Not warning this time, but blessing. And deep inside that quiet, something permanent took root. Not quite family, not quite salvation, but something stronger than both.